I'd like to welcome to the stage Anja Aronowsky Cronberg. Are you here, Anja?
Over here.
She's here. Anja, you are the Senior Research Fellow at London College of Fashion and also the founder and editor-in-chief of Vestoj.
Yeah,
Nearly.
correct. Yeah,
nearly
there. Nearly there. Thank you. Actually, I'd like, let's see. So I figured, I obviously have two co-panelists with me. I will introduce each one of them briefly, and then they will give their presentations, and after that we will have our conversation. So what we are going to talk about at this tail end of the afternoon is under a broad umbrella of new consumer voices. But before we get there, just so that you know a little bit more about me and my fellow panelists. So as Tony said, I'm Anja Aronowsky Cronberg. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Vestoj, which is a platform for critical thinking on fashion. And so it includes an annual themed journal. Past themes have included power, failure, slowness, and most recently, authenticity. We also have a website, and we do regular live performative events. So those mostly take place at museums or cultural institutions. Recently, we've worked with the Palais de Tokyo and the Fondation Galeries Lafayette in Paris, and with MoMA PS1 in New York. And also, and the two are connected, I'm a senior research fellow in fashion theory and practice at London College of Fashion, and my research there, in fact, is Vestoj. So I very much see my role as encouraging new alternative ways of thinking about dress and about fashion. So I'm attempting to do this by bridging academic research and the fashion industry, or, if you like, theory and practice in fashion. So with me, I've got Nipa Doshi and John J. So Nipa, who you'll meet in a second, she grew up between Mumbai and Delhi before leaving India to study at the Royal College of Art. So she founded the design practice Doshi Levien with her husband Jonathan about 15 or so years ago. And they have since gone on to work with many of the companies that form a part of Alta Gamma, BB Italia, Moroso, Capellini, and many more. John, well, his first big job was as the creative director of Bloomingdale's department store in New York City. He eventually moved to Portland to work with Wieden Kennedy, where he was responsible for opening offices in India and in Japan, and where he eventually became a partner. About 4 years ago, he left to begin work as the president, and I love this title, of Global Creative at Fast Retailing, which is the company that owns UNIQLO. So that means that he oversees all creative aspects within the company, so from product and store design to marketing, media, and branding strategies. So as I was saying to you before we get into the proper conversation, I would like for you to get to know Nipa and John a little bit better so that you understand, well, more of their background, their work, but most particularly their point of view. I mean, the framework from which they operate in. So with that, I'd like Nipa to get started. She'll talk about her work, about her point of view, and after that, John, and then we go on to the conversation. Nipa.
This is a funny picture of her. For me, for Vogue, so I kind of think I can tell my son, mommy was glamorous once, so, you do these kind of things. I don't know whose papers these are, but I'm going to leave them on the slide. It's great to be here. And my partner, Jonathan, he often says, or rather he always says, that I have very expensive tastes, and I'm very hard to please. I would like to say I take that as a big compliment. And I think, okay, so I have to also learn how to move the slides. Okay. I attribute part of my kind of love for beauty, I would say, to growing up in India, in a culture where I made my own clothes with a tailor. The sari man would come with a beautiful selection of woven fabrics. My mom's tops would be made by the tailor at home. If there was a wedding in the family, you know, the tailor was there, the textiles people were coming. So I think early on from my childhood, for me, creativity, luxury, and I want to talk about luxury in a way because it's something that I think luxury and beauty are bad words in design at the moment. But I think for me, my concept of luxury really was very early on this idea of a creative collaboration between the maker and the commissioner. In that case, even as a child, I was the commissioner. And the result for that, for me, was something that neither of us could have thought of together. And recently, we commissioned this painting with one of India's topmost miniature artists. And actually, for me, the idea of this painting really was this idea of a collaboration between the mythical world of India, its history, its culture, then the Corbusier house, which I almost grew up in when I was studying in Ahmedabad. And then we have these exquisite pieces, a magical reality in a way, in the kind of world that I want to live, which combines and is a collaboration between technology, urbanness, nature, beauty, history, stories. And I think also for me what's beautiful is the fact that we collaborated with this artist. He's 7th generation. He's learned from his father, who learned from his father. And in a way, I think that if I had a choice, and I think my ideal job really was to live in this world of exquisite beauty. And beauty for me, not of glamour, but I think of beauty within, you know, and that kind of manifests itself in the world around us, in the physical. So I'm a materialist. So I think many of you here, in a way, have condemned materialism. I kind of say I'm a materialist. I love materials. I love the way things are made. And I think, for me, as a human being, I need to express myself through making things. We work with several people who are really experts at what they do. And for example, I want to take the example of France, in a way, which I think really cares about paternity and the métier and the savoir-faire of the craft and the arts. And we work with Manufacture de Sèvres, and I think for me what's really beautiful is that they employ 400 people, and they're civil servants employed by the government just to keep the craft of porcelain alive. And in a way, I think that that's really beautiful, that this organization is not to make money. It is really to create meaningful collaborations between craftspeople, artists, and designers. So in a way, it was for me very beautiful to work on this cabinet with these incredible craftspeople. Which kind of brings us, in a way, you know, to Alta Gamma, and not that I want to talk about the companies themselves that we worked with, but I want to talk about commissioning, collaboration, and luxury, in a way, in the context of working with the companies that we do. And I think for me, at the heart of you know, the Italian companies is really the quality of collaboration and quality of the relationship that you have between the maker, in which case is industry for me, and the designer, for me, is the commissioner. You would think it's the other way around, that the companies commission us to make design. I kind of feel that we have so much creative freedom working with Italian companies like B&B, Cappellini, Moroso, that they trust us so intrinsically to do what we want to do, that I almost feel like I'm commissioning them to make the pieces that I really want to make. You know. And I think what is really, for me as somebody who grew up with craftspeople, you know, I think that what I really love is that, you know, you can have the idea, and then in the end, the product is so is so beautifully engineered, and you almost don't know what how they've made your design possible. And often when we are collaborating, I feel I'm learning from these people. Actually, I sometimes don't know how they put things together, and then they explain to us, Nipa, look, this is how we've done it, and I'm like, wow, I could have never have thought of that. And I think that that's something that for me is at the core of commissioning, luxury, and kind of having time to make this collaboration, which is not necessarily for one person or it's exclusive. It can be for many, many people, but it's the crafting of the idea that I think I'm really interested in. You know, I love makers so much that I married one. I married Jonathan, who actually is a fine cabinet maker by training, and I thought, right, I'm going to marry the man who can make me things, you know, make things beautifully. So, you know, in some ways, of course, growing up in India, I could have married a rich businessman. I'm like, no, give me a carpenter or a cabinet maker. And I think my parents were a bit mortified. What is she doing? You know, she's marrying below her caste. So I think what I love in a way about this idea is that when Jonathan makes things, or when he designs, that craft and making is really a central part of the design process. And I think when making is a form of drawing, I think the result, in my view, is exquisite. And it's something that really comes through in the work that we do. And I'm not trying to plug our work. I think I'm just trying to tell you how much we love making and how much we love craft and the physical world. And also what I love, of course, is that when we work with a company like Ketal, which is not an Alta Gama company, but it's a fantastic Spanish company where I see really a true collaboration between the owner, the creative director, and us. And the result actually is something that I truly can say I couldn't have thought of myself. Sometimes you rely on other people to tell you what you can do. I'm coming to the end, and I've already used my time, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker. I think often we talk about things being made in other countries, and people go to these countries because it's cheap to make things there. But I really believe that you go to a country because you want something from that culture. And so you're taking the culture of that country, the techniques of that country, and you make things there because that's the only place in the world where you can make things. And to always remember that there are people making these things. And I was shocked to see this really dark hand on the carpet, but I thought, Nipa, what do you expect? It's made in India. And I think living in Europe, I've almost forgotten that there are other people in the world who make things. And that kind of brings me to a fantastic project in a way where I think also of luxury as in a way a collective history of our cultures. And although this project started with this beautiful Indian miniature painting and we worked with Moroso, I think what I loved is that the final product in a way and the beautiful backside sofa we did, it was like creating this exquisite coat that the more you wear it, the more beautiful it becomes. And the result in a way for me is a collective history of Italy, of India, of collaboration, of dressmaking, and something that I think the more you have, the more you love.
Thank you, Nipa.
I'm running out of time, right? So I think
Sorry.
I'm going to go through this very quickly, and I think maybe it's time to end. And I think that in a way, if luxury is about giving time to make a creative collaboration. For me, it's also about joy, it's about color, it's about happiness. So I don't believe in minimalism. I don't think of myself as a problem solver. I think accountants solve problems, lawyers solve problems. For me, design is about celebrating life and joy. And I think in a way, if through globalization, we suddenly have this opportunity to be inspired by so many different parts of the world, to really dive into different cultures and create something of absolutely outstanding beauty, then I think that for me is luxury. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry, not the end. Am I sitting here?
Welcome to the stage, John.
Do you ever have the feeling that the whole world is a tuxedo and you're a pair of brown shoes? I said, when I saw the guest list of the speakers, I said, Paula, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? Paolo, I sell T-shirts, don't I? But as I looked at that wonderful presentation by WGSN, I found that there were, in fact, many connectors in the trends that's forcing us to look to the future and the things that I'm working on. So please indulge with me. I want to share a few slides and show you what my life is like on a daily basis here. So that's my fancy title here. Thank God I don't have to wear a badge. And our topic today of new consumer voices. And okay, I get it. We all have to grow our businesses, and of course we're looking for new markets. But I think that it just can't be that simple. That's kind of like a no-brainer. And it's not just about new markets. It's about new mindsets with the consumers that you already have, or with the customers, that we already have. And new cultures. When you enter new markets, be mindful that you're entering a new culture, and there has to be a great deal of respect. A great deal of respect. And for me, what's so interesting is this new definition of close. What I'm involved in is, quite frankly, the evolution of close. So I offer that where I work, we have a radical proposition. A radical in this sense. Radical in the sense of what is the world like today? And we are anything but made for all in the world today. And I would argue that this is, while it sounds familiar, it's quite difficult and very radical for today. And it's right for the zeitgeist. So made for all is the founding principle of our company. But simple made better is the way we think of our product and how we go forward with all future products. So for some companies, simplicity is the end point. For us, simplicity is the beginning, and then we try to make it better and better and better. Like my friends at Nike would say, there is no finish line. So simplicity is a starting point, and we strive every season, not every year, every season, to try to bring improvement to what we make. And what we make, in terms of that improvement, it can be an improvement in design, of course, in price, always, in quality, always, and in terms of sustainability. So what we make is called lifewear. And this is very confusing for people because I still have customers that come in and say, John, where's that lifewear department? Where's that special lifewear collection? Well, lifewear is under the philosophy of made for all and simple made better. Lifewear is everything that we make. So in Paris, Christophe Lemaire is our artistic director. I am in the process of opening creative labs in key cities around the world. Paris is one of the first offices. Portland, Oregon, where I am, has actually the very first office. And in Tokyo, we just hired amazing talent, the great editor of Popeye and Brutus magazine, as our creative director in Tokyo. So Christophe is working on what we call the UNIQLO U collection. His job is to test what are the limits, if there are any, on what is a basic. What is a basic item? What is an essential? Let's not rest on past laurels, and let's not use industry standards as to what is a basic. So let's push the boundaries of what is a basic. Very close to some of the findings in the WGSN report, we have been working with Hana Tajima, a talented designer in London of Muslim faith. I think this is our 4th or 5th year of her collection. So we've been heavily involved in the culture, in researching and working with her in developing the clothing that is acceptable in her culture, within her religion. And yes, there is a term called modest wear, but I hope that we can soon grow out of that term. And we're just making beautiful wear that is not showing too much skin, not showing too much shape, but is still incredibly flattering, incredibly feminine, incredibly beautiful. So I show this picture because on the left is the chairman of Touré, which is one of the outstanding textile innovators in the world. And the right is my boss, Mr. Yanai, the founder of UNIQLO. So Japan has this incredible hundreds and hundreds of years of textile craftsmanship. indigo, the dyeing, the making of textiles is something that is of a Japanese tradition. But so is the technology in terms of innovation in textiles, especially in the synthetics. What used to be called synthetics is becoming something else now. So the combination of those two factors, our DNA from Japan, the incredible craftsmanship of hundreds of years of making, and decades of leadership in science and technology and bringing textile technology to the forefront. So those three ingredients help to make us special. Last week I was in New York doing the press with Alexander Wang. The topic, the product is called Heat Tech, one of our most successful products. I think we've sold over 1 billion pieces of heat tech in the X number of years. And Alexander has come on to help change the concept of innerwear. We're also very happy as we expand around the world, especially in Europe, taking special care to look for stores in historic neighborhoods, finding buildings with historic stories, and then helping to renovate these stores and bring them back to life and try to contribute back to the neighborhood. And this kind of contribution to society is very important to us. One of my most fun jobs, parts of my job is the working with artists. So this is Brian Donnelly, KAWS. This is his sculptor. And of course, you know his work on the more the commercial side, and this is the opening of KAWS at our UNIQLO flagship store. Bringing, and I don't know about high and low anymore either, but for the use of, just for the purpose of here, bringing kabuki to teenagers, bringing kabuki to youth, and bringing kabuki to the masses around the world, and letting them enjoy this incredible art form. So we turned our Paris store into a kabuki theater. And lastly, when you come to Tokyo, please come visit me. I just did a new headquarters in Tokyo in the Ariake section. And the heart of our new headquarters, which is about the same square footage as a New York City block, and I'm adding a second floor now, at the heart is this. What I hope to believe is the best design library in Tokyo, filled with out-of-print books and new books, and we have a curator of books. So this is where, in this age of a digital revolution, in this age of logistics, in this age of all of those things that science will bring you, there's nothing like a beautiful book that will help to engage you and to help to share information. And I think that this is where the best conversations in terms of bringing people together and having these conversations and thinking about new consumer voices, this is where it begins for us, and this is the heart of our new headquarters. So please come have a coffee with me. Please come to Tokyo. Thank you. I didn't want to press the next button because there may be a video in here and I don't have time to show, so I'll just leave it. Oh, wait.
You're out of time.
I was so proud of myself. I finished right on time. As I was getting off the stage, it hit 00 up here, and I go, oh my God, Paolo, you're being so proud of me. And then I pushed the button by mistake, so I apologize. That was from Paris at the Pret, and it was a demonstration of our newest technology called 3D Knit. It's made by a Japanese technology company called Shimseki. So craftsmanship and technology Through one yarn, we knit a dress, full-length dress, out of one piece of yarn with no seams. So this is, and the pricing is incredible, and the technology going forward will be incredible. Christophe Lemaire is already using this for sweaters and so forth. So I just wanted to show that video unintentionally. So thank you very much.
So after the little extra dose of UNIQLO that we were lucky enough to get, I figured I'd like to just set the scene a little bit for how we will be interpreting the topic New Consumer Voices. Because I think it's a really, really interesting moment to speak about diversity and to speak about the importance of new markets at this time when xenophobia is rife and when immigration is such a very hotly contested issue. So considering, just like John was saying, that in capitalism growth is vital, it is really a no-brainer that new consumer groups must always be sought. I mean, this is less really about diversity in the ethical sense and more about good business sense, right? So, but what then about creativity and what we in Europe and in the West have to learn from the new creative voices emerging from these new markets? So creativity in design in both popular culture and in luxury is still so very dominated by Western aesthetics and taste. And when challenged, we often dismiss alternative expressions as bad in terms of design or quality. But how should we judge the culture of others or of the other? What's at stake for us, the judges, when we write off that with which we're not familiar? Could this be where protectionism sets in? I mean, what does it mean for designers from marginalized cultures or communities seeking to achieve global success? A few years ago, I was involved in this big research project in Shanghai, which meant that for about 5 years or so, I traveled to the city regularly to research the relationship between a young generation of fashion designers, often educated in the West, and the Parisian fashion establishment in the city where I live. So I found that whereas young Chinese designers really yearn to establish themselves on Paris Fashion Week, regardless of how successful they already are on their domestic market. Not surprisingly, the system in Paris is really resisting these new voices of power, to use a term from the WGSN report. So at a moment when Chinese consumers are welcomed for the economic revival they've brought to European and to American companies, Chinese designers, on the other hand, are seen as a threat. And they are a threat. I mean, where would it leave brands who depend on Chinese customers if those customers start buying domestic design instead? So, we're here to talk about what diversity means today in the world of design, luxury, and culture, and how we, the European design community, should relate to these so-called new consumer voices, particularly when these consumers become producers that we end up competing with. So, part of what we've been asked to reflect on leading up to this conference has been what luxury for all, what that term might mean. But I've been thinking, I mean, considering, and I'm speaking from my own experience also, that niche products and niche experiences are a really popular way of attaining loyal customers. I'd like to explore with you what this for all attitude, what it means, whether it's still relevant. Who does it well? I bet you have an answer for that, John.
Well, it's interesting. I question, this is a conference led by the greatest talent in the world in the luxury business. What am I doing here? But actually, I am in the luxury business. I am interested in helping people improve their lives, helping people spread joy. I mean, people ask me, John, what do you do today? I say, my job today is to create the greatest experience, the highest possible value for the greatest number of people on earth. The greatest number of people on earth, that's it. So, of course, it's for all. And from my previous business, where I came from a world of sports and sneakers and so forth, where making a drop with having a short supply, exclusive, limited editions, and making people wait in line for things and so forth, and be proud that it sold out and not enough people got them. It is the opposite of how I live my life today. My life is to bring joy to everyone.
So who would you say, I mean, and you obviously cannot mention the company who pays your salary, but so who does, can you think of anyone else who does this luxury for all well, and why?
I don't know. I think when we talk about luxury for all, why does it have to be a company that does luxury for all? I think that you can go into many countries and you go and have street food, and it's actually exquisite street food for all, So I think, I don't know why we kind of have this idea that one company in the world has to do something that's going to be accessible to everybody, and what is one man's luxury is not another person's luxury. So I think, we've talked about that, that although you could have the most beautiful suit by, I don't know, Brioni, just to take an example. But if you go to an Indian wedding, they will wear Indian clothes because it's bland, it's banal, So we might think it's the most beautifully tailored suit, but in another context, it's not luxury for them. So I think we have to also think about why should we decide what is luxury for all. When we say all, it's like 7 billion people on Earth, And
you say that to John.
I mean, it's not to kind of say you can't, but I hope you can.
Well, my answer would have been food. My answer clearly would have been food,
Yeah.
and not only street food, but certainly home. What you make at home. I mean, that kind of. Ultimately, that's what you want. I would say the food industry, it comes close.
Yeah. I mean, in fashion, there was a term, I'm sure you have all heard it and remember it, that was popular some years ago, was democratic fashion. I always thought that was a curious oxymoron.
Well, except within cultural context, because casual clothing was not democratic in Japan. Casual clothing was only for young people, hip people, cool people. And when I first met the founder of UNIQLO, he said, look at a pair of khakis, and he asked me to describe what that meant to me, and I So at that time, older generation in Japan did not wear jeans, they did not wear khakis or t-shirts. And so the democratization of casual wear, that may be a given in the West, or especially in the United States, but it was not a given in Japan. So we have to remember, until Admiral Perry came and opened the country up, there was no tradition of clothes in Japan.
But I mean, casual wear, today we think it's a given in the States, but I mean, in the 1950s, not that long ago, all things considered, I mean, the same attitude would have been prevalent in the States. I mean,
yes.
But I think it's still quite interesting to think about this desire for diversity, for accessibility, and then the striving for status that is still implied, not just in luxury fashion, but in fashion in general, that you're always chasing after something that's, you might touch upon fashion for a brief moment and acquire something fashionable, but before you know it, fashion's turned and you're unfashionable again, and so the search continues, and so we keep on buying and striving. And do you think that attitude actually is still relevant? I mean,
for some, yes, or else those businesses wouldn't be. So there is still that audience, still that audience. It's certainly not what we do. I mean, if the Paris runways are filled with pirate wear, and you don't see pirate clothes at UNIQLO 2 weeks later. So, but let's be honest, there still is that customer.
I think it also depends on, you know, what kind of level of fashion you're talking about. You know, if you're looking at the high street and perhaps you can afford to, you know, keep up with fashion. But I think if you really look at high fashion, it's actually unaffordable. Very few people can actually keep up with it.
But that's the point, no?
You know,
I mean,
and I think that, but again, I think that we are talking about keeping up is something that, you know, there's a whole movement where people are taking clothes and then customizing them and trying to almost create their own identity through clothing. And it could be taking something from UNIQLO or Zara and then trying to customize it or, you know, make it their own through jewelry or makeup. And I think that people try to kind of keep up with fashion in micro purchases, I feel, rather than macro purchases.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in my preface, I was touching on, I guess, I'm interested in this threat of non-Western producers, non-Western designers. I wonder what, if we could think a bit together, like what would be the value of a made in France or a made in Italy if made in China now is becoming of an equivalent quality?
Well, essentially you're talking about culture. And earlier today we talked the importance of culture design in Italy, which is so rich and everything. And clearly you're talking in part about culture. And the part that, you know, with China, it hasn't, you know, it's only been open, you know, for so many decades. And so that culture, while it has, well, we have 5,000 years of culture to be very proud of, we know it's there. And I think the research that we are doing in China, because we opened in last year alone 100 stores that we built last year, clearly the young people, the young designers are looking to within their own culture. Clearly they have learned from the West, and clearly they are gaining the confidence. This generation is gaining the confidence about looking within their own culture for inspiration. So it tends to be about culture.
What would you say, Nipa, considering that you do work with a lot of
I mean, I don't know if
Italian
I call
companies.
myself a non-Western designer in a way, you know, I don't know, I'm in between. But I think that for me, really, it's about something that's rooted in culture. So I think when I think of something that's made in Italy, I think it's almost, and I had this discussion, we were talking about it the other day, that it's no longer possible, especially with the, you know, the luxury brands, it's no longer possible to have something that you can't find everywhere in every airport. So I think if I want to have something made in Italy, I just have to go to any airport in the world that sells that brand and I can buy that product. So
except
there's no
it's
kind
not,
of...
Except it's not made in Italy, most likely.
Maybe
no?
it's not made in Italy, but maybe it is, and often it might be, or it's made in France. And I think that, in a way, I think that luxury's lost its luster for me in a way, that, you know, I don't feel like when I come to Milano, I want to go somewhere where I want to buy a dress which I can only get in Milan, you know, or you go to Hong Kong and you have something tailored for you. And I think some of that is gone already. And maybe it's naive to think that, you know, we can go to countries now and have something that really is from there. I don't know if it kind of answers your question, maybe not, you know.
Well, let's say there's something else that, I mean, both you and I, John, in our talks now, we're talking about the no-brainer that it is to look for new markets, a given for a company in capitalism. But I wonder if, I mean, since we are here because a point has been made that companies should open up, look to new consumer groups, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's an older consumer, whether that's a consumer with mobility difficulties, or whatever it might be. I wonder if either one of you have had any personal experience where you've encountered resistance towards these new markets from clients that you've worked with, if there's something that you can think of, and share with us how you dealt with it.
Also, the resistance of the client to enter those new markets, they're very old markets, most of them.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking, I know working in fashion, how long it's actually taken, surprisingly, to deal with Chinese customers with the respect that
Yes.
that customer group and any customer group deserves.
Well, I think what I find is, what I find incredible is that certain stores limit how much somebody from a country can buy, or there's an immediate kind of judgment made about, where you're from when you, when you enter a particular environment. But I also think that there is a tendency in Europe to dismiss the fact that every other culture apart from European culture doesn't have taste. And there's this whole thing that, in India everybody loves gold and they're like bling, or, in Russia it's about this, that, the other. So in a way I kind of feel that the companies want the money, but they almost dismiss the culture that is making them money, and which I find really strange in a way, But I think there is a kind of, I think things are changing now, and I think ultimately I think when people acquire money in these markets, they also acquire taste very quickly.
So where do you think that resistance or that dismissal, where does it come from, do you think?
I think it's Western hegemony, of centuries. I mean, let's not go there in a way, It's a kind of, when I came to the Royal College, it was terrible, the questions I was asked in my exam, And they say, in India, they copy a chair and then they copy all the mistakes. And I'm like, what's that got to do with me, So it's a kind of, but things are really changing, and I think, of course, everybody's traveling, and I think in some ways these cultures are becoming richer, and I think poorer in some ways by becoming richer, and I think we have this huge issue in India, for example, where people don't wear Indian clothes anymore. They wear really. I remember growing up in India and finding people were incredibly dressed in seasonal clothes, eating really good food, and now you see obesity is a big problem because people are eating processed food and they're wearing these really ugly clothes. I just kind of find in this hot weather, why would you wear denim? Why would you wear a gray t-shirt? Why wouldn't you wear the beautiful fabrics and colors, I think, that are more joyful?
What about you, John? Can you share an instance where you've encountered this Western, let's say, cultural superiority in yourself,
of course.
in someone else,
well,
how you dealt with
first
it?
of all, how did I get... in my previous life at Wieden & Kennedy, I moved to Tokyo to open the office. I discovered immediately that Western advertising agencies did not give a damn about Japanese clients. They were there just to make money, and there was no respect for the culture. So my first goal was to find a Japanese client. By some stroke of luck, Mr. and I became my first client, and I built the first brand, for UNIQLO back then in 98, 2000. But let me just go back and reverse a little bit, because I walk around the place, the headquarters, and I'm using this term, global standard all the time. Global standard. Our advertising must be global standard. Our stores must be global standard. And I'm slowed down by the chairman, by the founder, and he cautions me quietly. He says, just make sure, John, when you say global standard, you don't mean Western standard. And I have to stop, and I go, whoa, yes, sir, you're right. You're right. And of course, I'm speaking from marketing and advertising standpoint, but he's right. And so what we can bring, and I'll never forget, when he decided to come to the United States, I was no longer working with him, and I was concerned about, you're coming to the United States to sell casual clothes in America. So it's like selling rice to the Chinese, right? And he said, well, what advice do you have for me? And I said, there's only one piece of advice that I can give you. Stay Japanese. Never leave your DNA. Never give up your DNA. And that's the secret to our success, is to take something that was invented somewhere else and then inject our own cultural sensibilities into it, our own history into it, which means craftsmanship, ultimate quality. We will never give up on quality and never give up on the sense of value. So that's how we're trying to bring something new to this industry.
I was thinking, Nipa, I mean, you've experienced basically how India has adapted to the free market economy. I mean, what do you see as the pros and the cons of global Western companies establishing themselves on these new markets? I mean, where does it leave local businesses? Should they be protected? Does a Western company have a responsibility, or What's your take?
I mean, I think that, of course, I think that many companies like IKEA, when they wanted to come to India, and Walmart and many food companies, there were huge protests by the small businesses, little shops, because they felt that their livelihood would be completely, erased through these big companies coming. So, of course, there's a lot of protest around that. But I think also at the same time, we are still at a stage in India where people think that everything Western is good, in the general population. So if something is made, outside of India, somehow it has to be better quality. And I think IKEA found it incredibly difficult to come into India. And I think now they're kind of beginning to launch in the country. But of course, you also have a problem in India that, in fact, it's very difficult to find anymore really a well-made piece of furniture, for example, because of the way people live in smaller apartments now. So of course the flip side is that the alternative is to sit with a carpenter, okay, and
Not
have
to
the
go to
furniture
IKEA,
made.
then.
But then, the headache of actually managing that person, and if it's a festival, they'll take 5 weeks off, and if their aunt's mother's sister is ill, they have to go to the village. So, I mean, it's a headache to actually,
But why do you think, so why did IKEA have a hard time establishing themselves in India if you are also saying that in India, the exotic, in this case the Western, tends to be more desirable than
I think it was more to do with regulation, it has to do with duties, it has to do with ownership.
Right.
So I think it's more the fact that you cannot own a company.
It's more
It's more bureaucratic, and
than,
the taxes are incredibly high. So even when a lot of Indian people go to Singapore to shop, because to buy luxury brands in India, the duties are so high. So I think there are many other reasons why there's a kind of opposition to some of these companies coming in. But at the same time, I think it's a very sophisticated culture, and I think that culture is not frozen in time. So I think it's really important to remember that, this idea of globalization, exchange of culture, exchange of trade is not a new phenomena of now. There was a point where most of the textiles in the world were produced in India. So I think that globalization is a very old phenomena, and it's definitely not negative, in my opinion.
So John, I know you often mention the importance of what you call doing good. I'm quite curious, I wonder if you could explain what you mean by this exactly.
Well, it starts with our product, first of all, and of course we'll end up with the subject of sustainability, but making a product that will bring a higher experience, a better value for that person. That is not, the distinction, the confusion with our company name is that the holding company is called Fast Retailing, and the founder coined that name because he wanted to be a company of incredible innovation at pace and speed, which then gets confused by our audience and journalists as being fast fashion. And I will say the one thing we aren't is that. And why? Because we refuse to make disposable clothing. So it starts with that. Refuse to make disposable clothing, make clothes of highest quality and value that will stay in your closet, stay in your drawer for 10 years or whatever. So it starts with that. Because the landfill problem is that 50% of the clothes that are made in the world are never sold or whatever. They're just dumped.
But how does that work then within a fashion context? So is there a limit to how fashion? When do you say at UNIQLO, this is too fashion, that means it'll be...
Very much. We're not a fashion company, first of all.
How do you judge that even?
You judge it by the product. And I tell you right now that my first days of sitting in product reviews, the difference between sitting at Nike and the difference of sitting at UNIQLO was eye-opening for me. Judging it to be aspirational for a greater number of people rather than for a select group of people. So I think that's the first, for a designer. So it's no secret that Christophe Lemaire is a perfect artistic director for us because of his sensibilities, even though he comes from luxury. He comes from Hermes. I'm going off the little point here, but a great joy I've had in the last 3 months is working with Roger Federer, our new ambassador. That man has his own point of view of what is a basic, what is this essential, what is a classic, and he too is giving us feedback and is helping us. So our clothes don't even have our name You have to remember, we have no logos on our clothes, which makes sports marketing pretty challenging sometimes, but our clothes never have a name on it. So we start with that. And so it's not right now, I mean, the world is logo, it's a giant logo right now in the whole world. So we are about as far away from that as possible.
But, sorry to interrupt, but how does then UNIQLO think of, I mean, as you're expanding, you mentioned the vast expansion in China. How does the company think of its local competition? Do you at all?
Yeah, of course.
In
Everyone's
what way?
our competition.
But I mean, considering what Nipa was saying earlier about in India, for instance, when Western fashion companies come, the local competition is up in arms. Like, how does that work from the other end? You, as a big company, establishing yourselves, what's the relationship?
I'm going to be in your neighborhood. My first role, be a good neighbor, be a good citizen.
What does it mean?
Bring you better product at a price that everyone can afford. Help to clothe the family, the kids, everyone at an affordable price at the highest possible quality that you can give them. Starts with that. Now, the manufacturing process, and how it's shipped, and all of that leads up to sustainability. We're working very hard right now, in fact, on the denim process of reducing 99% of the water that's used and so forth. So all of these things are in process. So the sustainability process is a huge part of our future. And so, you know, we clearly are not there yet because the challenges are so big, but the fact that we have benchmarks and are moving towards those benchmarks is important. So in terms of going to China, and are we thinking of that consumer in terms of the local competitors? Yeah, our biggest competitor is up in Seattle called Amazon, you know, so our competitors are everywhere. We just have to be respectful of the culture of where we're coming in. Be respectful of the people and the culture. Make connections with that culture, and then learn from them. And then sometimes we will adapt the product according to that culture.
Would you ever scale back? Let's say if this is, let's say in theory, would you ever scale back if you noticed that the expansion into a particular market killed the local craftsmanship or local businesses?
So one of the things in Toronto, and one of the things we're doing around the world, is that when we opened in Toronto, we made sure we met with local businesses, mom and pop stores, cafes, coffee shops, apparel retailers, and we gave them space in our store and gave them an opportunity to show their wares, to show their brand, and show. So we do this in many places around the world. So that's not always consistent. Normally in a flagship store we can do that where we have the space. So it's very important, and a lot of our ambassadors that we recruit are all local people. So in the Philippines, you know, every time that we open a store, we choose 10 ambassadors from the local country, the local region, to really work with us. So we're very cognizant, very sensitive to the local culture. Let's remember, we were the #1 brand, apparel brand in China, and we are a Japanese company. Let's not be naive about the hurdles there, politically and socially.
Indeed.
But I think that when we talk about sustainability, we talk about going into other markets, I think we always think it's, you know, other countries or kind of developing countries. But I also think that, you know, a lot of people in Italy in the manufacturing industry have lost their jobs. And I think sustainability for me is so much also about that you can live in your community and you can make the things that you do. So I think sustainability is not for me about the environment. People talk about the environment as the only thing about sustainability. I think it's also, you know, if somebody doesn't have to leave their home and go and work somewhere is sustainability for me. And I think that these phenomena of kind of globalization is affecting many countries in Europe as well and the Western world. So I think maybe we always talk about the other as suffering. I think many of our countries here have also suffered. And I think many people who, you know, had factories, and in Italy so many factories have closed down, and we work with companies and they no longer exist. So I think maybe this is an issue that's affecting everybody in the world. You know.
So you're right, of course, and that's a good point. I think to tie back in a way to where we started before we wrap up and are forced off the stage. So I wonder from each of you who you see as the new voices of power, and why that would be?
For me, it would be women are the new voices of power.
Why?
Because I think that we almost need more women to come out into the workplace. I hope many more CEOs from Alta Gamma will be women. I think that in a way we have to bring another way of working in our world. And I think a lot of those points of view will come from women, in my opinion.
What do you think, John?
Well, I have to give two answers. I'm sorry.
You're-
I would echo
Go
number
ahead.
one for sure, but I'm going to give the UNIQLO answer, and that is everyone. It's interesting that I've been here all day now. I've not heard anyone talk about AI. I've not heard anyone talk about big data. I've not heard anyone talk about the impact of big data and AI on the future of the retailing business and the customers of the world. Those voices are being aggregated in algorithms that will be speaking to us in a way that scares the daylights out of most creators. But it's like John Midas said to someone, whoever it was it you? The future's coming whether you like it or not. And so for creatives, you have to embrace this idea of data. So I've said to you before, information is not knowledge, and knowledge is not insight. Our job is to find the best insight so that we can be the best creators in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.